The power for 5 million Americans is being held hostage by 34 feet of water, not by a foreign adversary, not by a market crash, but by the physical distance between the surface of a shrinking reservoir and the intake pipes of a concrete dam. As of this summer, Lake Powell, the second largest man-made lake in the United States, has fallen to 3,524.5 feet above sea level, its lowest summer mark on record. And at 3,490 feet, the 8 massive hydroelectric turbines inside Glen Canyon Dam will begin to choke on air. To prevent them from tearing themselves apart, they must be shut down. This is not a distant forecast. It is a mechanical certainty, and the crisis is not that the lake is going empty. The crisis is that a fundamental piece of American infrastructure, built for an era of abundance, is about to fail in an age of scarcity. But here is the detail that reveals the true emergency. The problem is not the turbines. The problem is the backup plan. Below the main turbines sit 4 smaller pipes. The river outlet works. 4 steel tubes, just 8 feet wide, designed as a last resort to pass water downstream to 40 million people in Arizona, Nevada, and California. An internal Bureau of Reclamation memo from March 2024 confirmed what engineers had feared for years. Those backup pipes are critically damaged. They are being eaten from the inside out by a force called cavitation. Relying on them for sustained releases risks a catastrophic plumbing failure inside the dam itself. The dam's check engine light is on. And the federal government is now playing a desperate shell game with the water of the American West to prevent anyone from realizing the engine is about to seize. To understand what is unfolding, you have to understand the 2 numbers that now define the fate of the Colorado River. The first is 3,490 feet. Minimum power pool. The elevation at which the turbines go silent. The second is 3,370 feet. Dead pool. The line where the last of the lake's usable water becomes trapped, unable to reach even the lowest outlet pipes by the force of gravity. A 120-foot gap separates the end of electricity from the end of water flow. The lights go out long before the river runs dry. And for decades, the assumption was that the river outlet works could bridge that gap. A memo, buried in government files until it was reported by Las Vegas station 8 News Now, changes everything. It reads, in the dry language of engineering, at reservoir levels below the minimum power pool, there are concerns with relying on the river outlet works as the sole means of sustained water releases. Those concerns are rooted in a violent physical process. Cavitation, when water is forced at high speed through a confined space. The pressure can drop so low that the water literally boils at room temperature, forming tiny pockets of vapor. Bubbles. As these bubbles move into a zone of higher pressure, they collapse. They implode with the force of microscopic shockwaves, blasting away at any surface they touch. Even solid steel. The 1983 flash floods gave engineers a terrifying preview. Massive releases through the dam's spillway tunnels triggered such violent cavitation that it tore out concrete and rebar, leaving a hole the size of a house. The same process is now happening inside the dam's last-ditch plumbing. David Wegner, a former scientist for the Bureau of Reclamation who studied the dam for years, has warned publicly. These pipes were never designed for this job. They were built for flood control, not to become the sole artery for the entire lower Colorado River. This is the part the official statements do not emphasize. The federal government knows its backup plan is a high-stakes gamble. So, on April 17, 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation, led by Commissioner Camille Kalimlim-Toten, announced an unprecedented intervention, an emergency action designed to do one thing: keep Lake Powell's water level above 3,490 feet at any cost. With inflow from snowmelt projected to be just 34% of the historical average for the year, models showed Powell could breach the power pool threshold as early as August 2026. So the Great Shuffle began. Reclamation ordered the release of up to 1 million acre-feet of water from Flaming Gorge Reservoir, hundreds of miles upstream in Wyoming and Utah. A bailout. Simultaneously, they slashed the amount of water they would release from Glen Canyon Dam downstream to Lake Mead by 1.48 million acre-feet. They are draining one lake to prop up another, while starving the biggest reservoir in the country to do it. Zoom out, and the cascading consequences become stark. That 1.48 million acre-feet of water withheld from Lake Mead translates directly into a loss of elevation, a drop of nearly 20 feet for the reservoir that supplies Las Vegas and huge portions of Arizona and Southern California. This action, taken to save Glen Canyon's turbines, is projected to slash hydropower generation at Hoover Dam by up to 40%. The decision to protect power for 5 million people in the upper basin states immediately jeopardizes power and water for millions more downstream. It is a zero-sum game played out across a watershed that supplies 1 in 8 Americans. Eric Balkin, the executive director of the Glen Canyon Institute, a longtime critic of the dam's design, calls it the most predicted disaster of all time. He is not wrong. The crisis was written in concrete and flawed math from the very beginning. The blueprint for this failure was drafted on November 24, 1922. That was the day the 7 basin states signed the Colorado River Compact. At a meeting near Lee's Ferry, a rocky crossing just 15 miles downstream from where Glen Canyon Dam now stands, they divided the river's water. They allocated shares to an upper basin, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, and a lower basin, Arizona, California, Nevada. The problem was their math. The negotiators based their allocations on data from an unusually wet period. They legally promised more water than the river, on average, actually carries. They built a system designed for a surplus that was never guaranteed. An overdraft was baked in from day one. For 4 decades, that overdraft was a problem on paper. Then came Floyd Dominy. As the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner from 1959 to 1969, Dominy was a force of nature, a man who saw rivers not as ecosystems, but as plumbing waiting to be harnessed. He pushed through the construction of Glen Canyon Dam, a 710-foot tall wall of curved concrete wedged into a remote desert canyon. Construction was completed in 1963. It was the upper basin's insurance policy, a massive bank account of water they could use to guarantee their legal delivery obligations to the lower basin at Lee's Ferry, even in a dry year. For a time, it worked. The reservoir, named for the explorer John Wesley Powell, began to fill. In 1980, it hit full pool for the first time, an elevation of 3,700 feet. The system seemed majestically successful, a monument to humanity's command over nature. 3 years later, nature would issue a warning. In June of 1983, a massive, unexpected snowmelt sent a torrent of water surging toward the dam. The reservoir was nearly full. Engineers had no choice but to open the dam's 2 spillway tunnels, 41-foot wide tubes designed to handle emergency overflows. The volume of water roaring through them was immense, and the speed triggered the same violent cavitation now threatening the lower outlet works. The tunnels were shredded. Engineers heard rumbling from deep within the dam's abutments. When they were finally able to inspect the damage, they found that the force of imploding water vapor had ripped out steel-reinforced concrete 3 feet thick. It was a multi-million-dollar repair job, and a terrifying demonstration of the forces at play. It was also a direct foreshadowing of the problem now facing the river outlet works. The dam was built to hold water back, not to let it go under extreme pressure through pipes that were never designed for constant, heavy use. For 40 years, that lesson was filed away. Now, it has become the central governing fact of the entire Colorado River Basin. This brings the story to the present day, to July 2026. The reservoir sits at just under 24% of its live capacity. The water level is 3,524.57 feet. 34.5 feet above the point of failure. The water released from Flaming Gorge is arriving, a transfusion to keep the patient stable. But it is not a cure. It has bought time, nothing more. And the impacts of this managed decline are rippling outward. For the 5 million customers in 6 states who get power from Glen Canyon Dam via the Western Area Power Administration, the threat is existential. WAPA's electricity is some of the cheapest in the nation. It powers farms, small towns, and 53 Native American tribes. Losing it would mean a scramble to find more expensive power on the open market, a shock that would be felt on utility bills across the region. Then there is the water itself. The 1.48 million acre-feet now being held back in Powell is water that will not reach Lake Mead. This deepens the crisis for the lower basin states, forcing them closer to their own trigger points for even more drastic cuts. It is a brutal triage. To save the plumbing of one dam, the federal government is actively lowering the water supply for another. The logic is cold and mechanical. A failure at Glen Canyon Dam is functionally a point of no return. If water drops below 3,370 feet, there is no physical way to get it out. The Colorado River would, for all practical purposes, stop at the Arizona-Utah border. That would cut off the water supply for Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Tucson, and Las Vegas. It would dry up millions of acres of farmland. It is an unthinkable scenario. A possibility so catastrophic that reclamation is willing to inflict immense pain on Lake Mead and Hoover Dam just to keep Powell above the mechanical red line. The political fallout is escalating in parallel with the dropping water levels. The rules that have governed the river for the last 2 decades, the 2007 interim guidelines, are set to expire on December 31st, 2026. For years, the 7 basin states have been locked in bitter negotiations to draft a replacement. They have failed. The upper basin states, represented by the Upper Colorado River Commission, have one proposal. They want to change how water losses from evaporation are accounted for, shifting more of the burden to the lower basin. The lower basin states, led by Arizona and California, have a completely different proposal, focused on maintaining their historical water rights. As of July 2026, there is no compromise in sight. The states have missed their own deadlines. The Bureau of Reclamation is now being forced to move forward on its own, drafting a federal plan that it could impose on the states if they cannot reach an agreement. It would be a legal and political firestorm, a declaration of federal control over a century of state-led water law. Now, here is the part that is happening outside the negotiating rooms. As the water recedes, it is rewriting the landscape. The iconic bathtub ring on the canyon walls marks the high water line like a scar. Once drowned side canyons, like the cathedral in the desert, are re-emerging, their sandstone amphitheaters visible for the first time in generations. But this is not simply a return to a pre-dam state. The ecosystem has been fundamentally altered. The fight to save the dam's mechanics is creating a new set of environmental crises. The Center for Biological Diversity has filed legal notices over the impact on endangered fish, which struggle with the warmer, sediment-heavy water being released. The emergency releases from Flaming Gorge are now altering the temperature and ecology of the Green River downstream, impacting its own delicate fish populations. The solution to one problem is creating a dozen others. And then there is the economic cost. The recreational industry built around Lake Powell, once $1 billion engine for the region, is suffering. Marinas sit on dry land. Houseboats are stranded. The tourism that defined towns like Page, Arizona, located right next to the dam, is facing an uncertain future. The fight to save the dam is a fight that sacrifices the very resource that made it a destination. It is a paradox playing out in real time. The great reservoir, built to create abundance, is now a symbol of cascading failure. The engineering debate centers on a single question: can Glen Canyon Dam be retrofitted for this new, drier reality? Groups like the Glen Canyon Institute and the Utah Rivers Council have advocated for years for a radical solution. Drill new bypass tunnels around the dam at a much lower elevation. A permanent fix that would allow water to flow downstream regardless of the reservoir's level, effectively turning the dam into a pass-through structure rather than a storage unit. It would ensure water delivery to the lower basin, but would permanently sacrifice the dam's ability to generate hydropower and hold a massive water reserve. The cost estimates range from hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. And the political will to fund such a project before the current system completely breaks remains unverified. The Bureau of Reclamation's current strategy is not a long-term solution. It is a series of short-term patches designed to get through the next year, the next season, the next month. The crisis is forcing a century-old question back to the surface. What is the purpose of Glen Canyon Dam? Was it built to generate power? Was it built for recreation? Or was it built as a water bank to ensure legal deliveries downstream? For 60 years, it could be all three. The water was high enough. Now, with the reservoir a quarter full, those functions are in direct conflict. Generating power requires keeping water in the lake. Honoring downstream water rights requires letting it out. And the physical limitations of the dam's plumbing mean that soon, it may be able to do neither effectively. The dream of Floyd Dominy, of a river perfectly controlled and allocated for human use, is colliding with a hotter, drier climate and the hard limits of concrete and steel. The system is now so fragile that every weather forecast is scrutinized. Every tenth of a foot the lake drops is a headline. The July 2026 level of 3,524.5 feet is a number that keeps water managers awake at night. It is only about 34.5 feet away from the start of the true crisis zone. A few dry months, a poor winter snowpack, and that buffer could disappear. The emergency actions of 2026 staved off the immediate threat, but they did so by drawing down another reservoir and creating a water deficit downstream that will have to be paid back. It has pushed the crisis at Lake Mead and Hoover Dam into a more dangerous phase. These are not isolated problems. They are symptoms of a single, overburdened system finally reaching its breaking point. A system where the margin for error has vanished. The entire water supply of the American Southwest has been built on a series of assumptions. Assumptions about climate, about engineering, about political cooperation. Every one of those assumptions is now proving false. There is one more thing the data cannot predict: the psychology of a crisis. As the December 31st, 2026 deadline for a new set of operating rules approaches, the pressure on state negotiators intensifies. Do they compromise and accept permanent, painful cuts? Or do they hold their ground, defend their legal rights on paper, and risk a federally imposed solution that could be even worse? It is a game of chicken, played with the water for 40 million people, and the physical reality of the lake level does not care about politics. It does not care about century-old compacts. It only responds to gravity and evaporation. The water keeps dropping. The distance to 3,490 feet keeps shrinking. So, 3 questions now hang over the Colorado River. With the dam's backup plumbing known to be compromised, what is the government's unstated plan if the emergency shuffle fails and the lake drops below the turbines? Can 7 states with competing interests rewrite a century of water law to fit a new, drier reality before the system fractures into legal chaos? And what does it mean for the future of the American West that its 2 largest water banks are now pitted against each other, locked in a mechanical death spiral where saving one actively drains the other? The water is still there. Millions of acre-feet are held behind that concrete wall, but it is getting closer to the invisible line that separates a functioning reservoir from a stranded pool. The water that fell as snow in the Rockies last winter is right now descending through the reservoir, moving slowly toward the giant penstocks that feed the turbines. It is moving toward an elevation of 3,490 feet. In the dark, deep inside the dam, The 4 smaller outlet pipes wait, their steel walls scarred and weakened by the imploding force of bubbles they were not built to withstand. And hundreds of miles to the north, the water level of Flaming Gorge Reservoir is falling. A sacrifice sent south not to restore a lake, but to delay the failure of a machine.